I'm still working on the door that's going on the back of the shop, and it has an upper shutter, so it's got an opening area. It doesn't have glass in there, so it's just kind of a wide open thing. Make more sense when you see the door finished. But it needs some little slide bolts to hold that shutter closed. So today we're going to take a look at making a pair of little slide bolts that have kind of a floral element on top, kind of a stylized flower, I guess. But these should be just the thing for holding that upper shutter closed. Black Bear Forge is sponsored by Blacksmith Supply, your online resource for blacksmithing tools, equipment, and supplies. I have an idea of what I want these little slide bolts to look like, so I've just made a kind of a simple drawing here, and I'll cut it out. And this will eventually be my pattern piece for cutting out the back plates. I'm going to use a plasma cutter to cut these out, but you can use any tools you have available. In previous videos, we've looked at doing it as simply as using a cold chisel to cut these. With these rough cut, I'm going to go ahead and glue that pattern to one of them, and that will give me a little bit more accurate template to follow. Ideally, I'd have a paper pattern for both of them, but I'll just use one and transfer the shape to the other. And then I can trim these up a little bit with the bandsaw. If I was a little bit more steady with the plasma cutter, I could do this much closer to the line. And of course, if you had CNC equipment, that would make it really easy if it's worth setting up the pattern for it. Grinder is another great way to go for stuff like this, and just grind it down to the line. I do this quite often with things like this. Again, it's just up to whatever tools you have, and in the long run, a file is probably one of the best things you have for doing things like this. It's a little bit more tedious, more time-consuming, but files can be very precise, and I almost always rely on a file to get down to the final shape on something like this. Variety of files really pays off. So does this little filing vise. This is an adjustable filing vise that came from Cloverdale Forge in Canada. I'm going to work some of this under the treadle hammer. I have a safety stop here because I'm hand holding the chisel. I don't want that hammer to be able to come down and hit my hand if the chisel kicks out. Now you can do this at the anvil with a regular hammer and a chisel. I just find the treadle hammer to be an easier way to do this. But you don't need the treadle hammer. It's just convenient if you happen to have one. Oftentimes people watching videos think that they can't do it if they don't have the same tools being used in the video, and nothing could be further from the truth. You need to adapt the techniques and the tools for what you have available in your shop. There's always another way to accomplish just about everything you see somebody else doing in a video. With the chisel lines in, I'm going to cut in just about, 1/16 of an inch, just a little. I'm just establishing a point in line with those chisel cuts that I will then go in with a file and file the outer curve of the petals. That cut isn't strictly necessary, but it sure makes it easier to get a file in there. Of course, you could put that cut in with a hacksaw. There's going to be way more file work on this project than there is actual forging on this project. And that is not really out of the ordinary. A lot of work in a blacksmith shop really does take place cold at the bench. Using a little round chisel, I will give the illusion that those petals go all the way around in a circle, even though I'm not going to do any cutting or filing in that section of it. Now working from the back side, I'm going to put some little dimples in, again working under the treadle hammer, and I'm doing this cold at this point. You can see how the safety stop protected my hand from getting hit by the treadle hammer there. Then I'll go in and make those dimples a little deeper, and this spreads that material out just enough to really give that some more shape other than what I filed in, and it makes the whole thing look better. Doing this second step hot would probably be a little bit better, but cold does work. Of course, that'll need a hole for a screw. That's where the screw's going to go. And look, we do get to do a little bit of forge work. I just want to give some dimension to that little flower element and make it domed. But I do want it to sit flat on the door when I install these, so I'll work around the edges without flattening the center. I'm going to clean out for the slot that the bolt rides in using a straight chisel. You should always have a soft block on your anvil, whether that's on a treadle hammer or your regular anvil, if you're cutting through with a chisel. I don't own a milling machine, but that might be a good way to cut these slots if you have one available. This is a one-sided chisel. It's straight on the back and just has a single bevel on it, and that makes a cleaner cut than a regular chisel does. For the bolt, I want 3/16 by 1/2 inch material, which I do not have any available, and I need so little of it, I'm just going to forge out a piece of 3/8 square bar and make that bar. It's an advantage we have as blacksmiths. If you don't have the right material, you can resize something you do have and make it fit the purpose at hand. Working the vise, I'm going to go ahead and bend those tabs over, and that's what the bolt's going to slide through. Bolt has to slide into something else that's on the other side of the latch. It's got to be a two-sided process, and that's going to be a similar piece, but with only a single one of the little flower elements on it. All of the steps are really about the same. I've got to do this multiple times, not only on these slide bolts, but also on the hinges that are going to go with this. If you don't get this to knock all the way out after you chisel cut, if it just kind of gets wedged in there, doesn't quite cut free, it's not really a big deal to take a punch and just knock that slug out. And all the forging on the element is essentially the same as what I've done before. There's nothing new here. The only thing I'm going to do different on this one is I will go ahead and get it hot for that second round of punching, although I'm not going to get it super hot. It just doesn't need to be a bright orange heat or anything. I'm just trying to give more depth and dimension to the whole thing. It's these little steps like this that make it look a little bit more special than leaving everything flat the way it was filed. It definitely takes longer, but it's absolutely worth the effort in my mind. This piece needs to be bent as well. Having a nice crisp edge in a vise does help this. This vise does leave a few tooth marks, but it's not really noticeable in the finished piece. I did make these a little bit too big. I mean, my material was a little oversized for this, so I'm going to go ahead and grind it down and make it fit better, and it just will look like it's a part of the set a little bit better this way. Now these need some sort of a knob to actually slide the bolt and to retain the bolt so it doesn't slide all the way out when you're using it. So I'm starting again with 3/8 bar. I'm going to put an upset on the end of it, and this is going to turn into our little knob for these. There are so many different things you could do for a little knob like this. Just use your imagination. That's just what I chose to do this time. If I did it again, I'd probably take a different approach. I'm going to full her in with a guillotine tool to give me a little shoulder I can work to as I forge that knob into a better shape. I'm going for sort of a ball shape. I'm not worried about making a perfect ball. I'm okay with some facets on it. It's just something that's comfortable to grab and operate the latch. Going back to the guillotine tool and some butchering dies, I'm going to create a little bit of a shoulder, and that's where a tenon will be formed, or in this case it'll actually be a threaded tenon or a screw so that I can thread the whole thing together. That gets cut off, so these are cut off dies in the guillotine tool. This is the Smith & Magician guillotine tool. It's the one available through Blacksmith Supply. That makes this the perfect opportunity to thank Blacksmith Supply for sponsoring today's video. Blacksmith Supply has lots of tools in addition to the Smith & Magician, which I've been using in my shop now for 20 plus years. They have anvils, they have forges, they have fly presses. They have just taken over dealership for Samac power hammers. They've got post vices, swedge blocks. You name it, you can pretty well equip an entire blacksmith shop with products from Blacksmith Supply. People are always asking where I get these long bristled brushes. These are a casting brush. These come from Blacksmith Supply. My favorite Kevlar hot mill gloves come from Blacksmith Supply. And I was a regular customer long before I started doing YouTube videos. So they're a great resource, and I encourage you to check them out. Let's get back to work on our project. Guillotine tool is really handy. I think this is the fourth set of dies I've used on this little project. And these are tenoning dies. This helps create a tenon of the proper size. I'm actually going for a number 10 screw size here. It'll be cleaned up with a file. It gets all the scale off, helps round it up as cleanly as possible down to the right size. And then it's time to go ahead and cut some threads on there. I'm using a number 1032 die, so it's a fine thread. Not very many threads are actually going to go into this, so I wanted to engage as many threads as possible with the finer thread. The piece that we forged out earlier has been cut to length so that it will operate the way I want it to. It also needs a hole drilled in it that can be threaded for the number 10 by 32 screw. I'm going to get it all cleaned up and do a last wire brushing before I do the final assembly on this. And I'm also going to take that opportunity to go ahead and wax this. went ahead and drilled a hole in the back of the plate where it won't really show, and that should all make sense in a minute. I'm adding some Loctite to the threads, got way too much there, and I'm going to put that in there and get it tight but also lined up square with the bolt. I don't want the square shoulder to be off. Then using a center punch, I'm going through that hole right in the back of that screw and pushing the back of the screw out into the hole, so I'm kind of upsetting it a little bit. Between that and the Loctite, I hope this never moves. This does make for an interesting little slide bolt. I made a pair of these. These are going on the back door of the shop that I've been working on in the wood shop, which is almost complete. But before it can be installed, it needs things like latches that go on the upper shutter. These don't actually hold the door shut. This holds a little extra shutter, which will all make sense when you watch the video about the door. And hopefully that video is going to be ready next week over on the John Switzer channel. I'm also working on a set of hinges that will go on that upper shutter area on the door. But because we've made so many hinges here and I have so many more hinges that I'm going to share on this channel, I did not include a video of making these hinges. These are some I started 2 or 3 years ago and just decided to finish in this style just to go on the door and to complement these little slide bolts. I've enjoyed our time hanging out in the shop today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you have time in your day to get out to your shop. Make something, but stay safe. Wear your safety glasses. We'll see you for the next video.